This is archaeology from the ground down, part one, the second section, which I guess I'm going to label as B. The last one ended, we were talking about the Wheeler-Kenyon method, which uses these 5 by 5 meter squares. The video takes you to Ashkelon, where Larry Steger worked for many years, and they're still excavating. Harvard's still excavating here. Here they use 100 by 100 meter squares that they divided into 10 by 10 meter squares within that 100 by 100 meters. So different than the 5 by 5 meter, a variation of it. He says you can't be a slave to the methodology. And they remove the bulks as they go. I'll say that this is the only site I know of that uses this system. But since they're right along the coast, as you can see here, that means their bulks are mostly made up of sand, and so the bulks aren't going to last easily anyway. So that might be part of the reason for this methodology. But whatever method that we use and produce the data, we have to interpret the data. And as we said, Israeli archaeologists tend to expose more horizontally, especially in the Iron Age, whereas British and American archaeologists have traditionally exposed things more vertically. But of course, we can put these two systems together. But just collecting the data is not enough. By the way, this is a picture of Bryant Wood standing at Jericho, the wall of Jericho. He's worked there extensively trying to work on the chronology of the site of Jericho. What I have here is something that's not really in the video, but something I put in. This is pictures of the buses that we use in Jordan to get out to the site. This is us leaving in the morning. It's very early in the morning. We start our excavation time. We get up about 4 a.m. or so, 3:30, 4 a.m. We depart usually about 4:30, and we get out to the site about 5:30. But we want to get there before the sun rises. The reason we want to do that is we take pictures at the very beginning, and we need good lighting for that. Soft lighting is in the morning. There's really no shade, that sort of thing. So if you can get the lighting just before sunrise, then you get it without a lot of shadows, and you get soft lighting. It really makes things show up better when you can do that. We work out on the site then for about 4 hours, and we take a break, what we call our second breakfast, usually consisting of watermelon, maybe some bread, some cheese, something like that, something light, but something to eat. And then we go back and we work about another 3 to 4 hours, and then we begin to pack up and we head back in. Usually then we have our lunch about 1 or 2, depends on the timing of the excavation, after you've had a chance perhaps to clean up and go up and eat your lunch. Then there's a rest period for an hour or 2, and then we begin pottery washing, pottery reading. After that's done, then usually there's lab work, record keeping work that you would do for the next couple of hours until dinner, which is usually around 6. Sometimes in the evening there are meetings between people working at certain parts of the excavation, so that they can talk over what's going on in their squares, or perhaps a lecture about a topic. And then you have paperwork. And of course, if you're getting up about 3:30 in the morning, you need to go to bed by 9 or 10. If you go to bed, say at 10, you can get to sleep at 10. You're only getting 5.5 hours sleep. We do that at least 5, sometimes 6 days a week. So you have to be careful to get your rest as you do it. But this is the daily grind, as I call it. And it is a lot of work. So excavation field work, then we go out and we excavate with a small pick and a small trowel, digging very slowly, putting things into a dustpan, from that into a gufa. A gufa is a basket that's made out of a rubber tire with rubber handles. They're flexible, very tough, very durable, and we use them than to take stuff down, and we typically sift everything. So there's a lot of record keeping. You have to have a notebook. You keep all the records of what it is you find, where you found it. You take notes about that. There's photographs that are taken. There are drawings that are made. And everything must be tagged, paper tag with a string. Place that on the bucket of the pottery. Put it in the bag of the pottery or the bones or the metal. We divide out all the material into its types. And everything has to have a label, has to have a tag. Okay, so you sift the earth to make sure you get all the material, the metal, the bone, the pottery, whatever else you might find. Then you take the pottery in the form of the little potsherds. They are soaked in water in a bucket, and then they are washed and cleaned and allowed to dry, and then we read them. Now, we don't read them like a book, but we read them by looking at the texture of the material, looking at the color of the material, how thick it is, how it's shaped, any decorations on it, and we can usually date it to a period. We might say, well, that's Byzantine pottery, late Byzantine pottery. We might say that's Iron 1, that's Iron 2C, or Iron 2 pottery. And we would put it into those categories, and we put that all in the notebook, so it helps us date the layers that we're in. And we always date things to the last or the earliest material. That is, let's say we have Iron Age, Bronze Age, and Roman pottery in a earth layer. We would have to date it to Roman, even though we have bronze and iron in there, and Roman's much later, because you have to date it to the pottery that's in it that's from the most recent period. Obviously, it couldn't date to the Bronze period if it has iron and Roman pottery in the layer. Then the pottery could possibly be reconstructed, drawn. That's all part of the record keeping. We do a lot of drawing and measuring. Here you see they're using a plumb bob. They're using a line level here, and they're dropping down again in elevation. You have to take elevations as we go. This is all mapped in and placed in on our drawings. You have to excavate things like this. This is a burial, and we find these sometimes. I can tell you by looking at this, this is a very recent burial, probably a Bedouin burial, because they often are laid into the grave this way, and they have their arms that are crossed like this, and you can see the teeth are all intact. So this is very recent. My guess is this is an Islamic burial. You can tell how the religion someone is by the way they're buried, actually. If they're buried in a way that they're facing Mecca when they would sit up, then they're Islamic. If they're facing the east, say when Jesus would return, then they are Christian. Here's another way of taking levels. This is a transit or dumpy level. Here is our surveyor's rod. You read the elevation off of that and enter that in. You have to do that quite frequently for your mapping, and to also tell how deep you are in the square for your record keeping. Another activity we might do is called trimming the bulks. Here we see has a bulk line across here, measuring, has a plumb bob and a small pick. Here trimming down to make sure, here's another string over here, make sure everything is level. Everything is level so that we can read the stratigraphy well. You need to have your bulks straight. Otherwise, you'll begin to go from a 5 by 5 meter square to a 4 or 3.5 by 4 meter square. Everything will start to slope into the center, and you'll lose a lot of your data. You also won't be able to read the stratigraphy right. Washing pottery. Here we see somebody's washing the pottery. Registering. All the pottery has to be labeled. Here's some with decoration on it, combing. Some of the wear that's there. Reconstructed as possible if we have enough pieces. Then it has to be drawn like this by hand. Is really the best way to draw it. You can photograph it, of course, but drawing it's going to reveal things that you wouldn't otherwise know or probably see in a photograph. And you see how they stipple it and draw. These are all drawings of lamps. I can tell you that's a drawing of a Hellenistic slipper lamp. There, this is a a Roman flared snout, probably that one there. This is a Byzantine lamp over here, pilgrim's lamp, they usually call it. This is a cook pot, Roman cook pot. So this is all Roman pottery here, Roman and Byzantine. Archaeology is a multidisciplinary effort, a team effort. We have all kinds of people on the excavation. Historians, I'm a historian. Historians come along, look up the records that way. Biblical scholars, epigraphers, people that specialize in inscriptions. Geologists, soil scientists, archaeobotanists, computer technology kind of people, survey people, remote sensing, geographers, all kinds of fields. Now, one of the technical areas that we use, and I just have a couple of screens on this, is called neutron activation analysis. This is one example of a specialized study in archaeology. You determine the trace elements in the pottery itself, in the clay of the pottery, by looking at those trace elements, say silicon, aluminum, things like that, and you find the amount of it. Much like a fingerprint, like you see down here, it peaks at different areas, and then you compare those elements that are in the clay and the proportion that they're in the clay, and it becomes much like a fingerprint where you can figure out the source of the clay. And then if you figure out the source of the clay, you know where the pottery was made within a pretty short distance. They aren't going to haul that clay very far. And not all clays are good for pottery, so that's a very important thing to do. So it can help to determine, was the pottery made locally or was the pottery imported from somewhere else? And if so, perhaps we can figure out where it was imported from. So this helps us determine trade patterns and that sort of thing. Now, one of the things that is mentioned in the video is the idea that despite all the work that we do in the field, where maybe we'll go 5, 6, 7, I've even been on excavations for 8 weeks in a row, and you're out there, let's say from 4:30 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're doing that maybe 6 days a week plus all the lab work. Even with all those hours we're doing that, the ratio of the work that needs to be done is estimated as being 1 to 10. That is, you would do 10 times the amount of lab and lab work and analysis than you would spend in the field. So let's say we spend 5 weeks in the field, we're going to have to spend 50 weeks analyzing things, okay, just for an idea. So a whole year of pretty intense work. So that's why a lot of excavations only go every other year, because everybody's doing the archaeology is teaching classes and doing a lot of other things. They can't devote their full time to it. So the data must be analyzed, cataloged, drawn, compared to stuff that was found elsewhere. The artifacts must be cleaned and preserved and recorded. And a lot of times they have to be returned to the home country, so you don't get to keep them. So you got to make a good record of it. And then you have to write preliminary reports, and then focus on publications. This is in publications are probably the things that archaeologists fail to do the most, because it is most difficult to make the time, and it's not as much fun, I would say. The adventurous fun part of archaeology is going overseas, digging and discovering. After you've done that, now you got to go through and catalog and record and analyze and then write all this stuff up. Of course, once you write it up, then you open up yourself to criticism, analysis by other people who might say, well, that doesn't look like what you said there is right. Until you write it up, they can't really say that, because they don't know what material you have. So this is a big problem in archaeology, is actually getting all your material published. All right, we're going to end this for now and look for the second part later on. Thanks.